All right, welcome to the 9th OCN Developer Community Call. As usual, I'm recording this call and it will be available afterwards. The agenda for today is the OCN Onboarding Experience, as well as the OCN Party Discovery and Telemetry. Just before that, as a quick introduction, I'm John. I'm a developer with Energy Web. And we also have Robert and Adam Stavely on the call, who are also developers and product owner, respectively. And we also have Mo. Welcome again. Let's move on then to our first item here, the OCN Onboarding Experience. So our objective here is to get some feedback from OCN community members on their experience in general, joining the OCN, registering as a party, joining an OCN node, perhaps setting up an OCN node. So perhaps we could discuss how we could get feedback on these experiences. Mo, you're on this call now. If you have any feedback on your experience thus far connecting to the OCN, that would be great. But we could also talk about perhaps putting out a survey or something similar to collect further feedback from community members.
Yeah, I mean, I think a survey makes a lot of sense because I'm sure there are other people that are following the project but not here today. My experience so far has been we're trying to onboard one or two companies that are very interested in the EVROAM use case and share the OCN network. So there were some issues related to, there are national registries which can be made, by nonprofits, by companies, or through like the association. I reached out on Slack as well. But I mean, there isn't a clear, it wasn't very clear, why exactly there was a need for this, and also how to kind of have a more maybe streamlined way to get this done. At the moment, we're reaching out to these companies. They're pretty big, and we're thinking about setting up, a registry for Turkey, a national registry. So this is something that was a concern and actually kind of like was a bottleneck for us. So I think probably for newer countries that are, maybe companies that are trying to be involved with the OCN network, there could be some sort of, I don't know, maybe some sort of like central service to connect between all these different national registries so that it's not just hosted by one company individually. It could be done something done even in a decentralized way, which might be good. So I think this is something that we're trying to solve, and it's a bit of a bottleneck so far.
Right. So the registry allows the country code to be known. Is that right? Or it also shows a list of party codes as well, party IDs.
Mm-hmm. So identity has both the country code and party ID, right?
Right.
So the country code there is, I think the OCN is using, the OCPI is using ISO 3166 for the country code, and for Turkey it's pretty clear, it's TR, no problem. But I mean, the party ID is what needs to be unique, right?
Right.
And this has to be both unique on, OCN and also, at the national level, so that there is no like collision in terms of identity. So for that to not occur, everybody, basically companies have to all agree on, a national registry so that the party ID at least is unique.
Right.
And this has to be done again and again at the national level. The problem is there's no clear, like, who takes authority here? The Ministry of Transportation, is it a nonprofit? Is it a company? It's basically first come, first, I guess, create first user, first person who needs this registry or register has to create themselves one for themselves, maybe then trying to like, share this with the rest of the community. Luckily, we're working with big enough companies that might be able to kind of like get this going, but this is taking some time because now we have to kind of like lobby for this to be more adopted by some of the, let's say, charge operators, some of the, there's an EV car manufacturer here as well, so we're talking to. And this is a bit of a, I mean, we don't have to do it, I understand, but it is a potential issue. So we're kind of having to do this ourselves.
I see. And what was Elad's, too bad we don't have Robert on the call here, but what the Robert from Elad, what was their position on it? Were they saying that, yes, it's up to each country to define their own registry? They don't maintain a central registry. Did they communicate anything to you, Mo?
Yeah, so I think Robert, he said that, it said that it makes a lot of sense for, talk to a government organization related to transport. And, for us, I think that's kind of like out of scope because we can get to the table, talk with these people, but it takes such a long time for anything to be decided. And if we're talking about setting up totally like a registry, and a website and like onboarding process, I think we're talking years for a government to get to this stage. I don't think this is really feasible today. What is more feasible is because the companies that are getting involved are pretty big, they can show adoption for this, and then that's when the government agency might show interest, right? Once this is as a voluntary mechanism, we're setting up our own registry, and in the future, we can, move this maybe from like currently we're not really sure how it can be set up, but it can move towards a nonprofit. I think there's a couple of EV nonprofit associations. Maybe we can move this registry to them, and maybe later on to the government level. But I think starting off with the government doesn't make sense, to be honest.
I see. I'm just thinking from the OCN perspective, we have the single OCN registry smart contract. So I believe collisions would be impossible. Only one party could have the same country code and party ID. So in that sense, perhaps on the OCN, perhaps outside with OCPI, there could be potential for collisions. You could have two peers using the same country code and party ID unbeknownst to each other. But I think in the context of the OCN, a collision isn't possible.
I totally agree. You know what could be really cool? If when the OCN identity is being generated, if there was a way to kind of like look at outside the OCN, like the OCPI, like, is this party ID existing already somewhere else? If there's a way to kind of like search for existing IDs and then to kind of like prevent that being, if there is one, then, stop it from being registered at the OCN level, as long as, there might be like identity at the OCPI level, which you want to also have it available on the OCN level. So you're not really creating a new one. So porting existing identities could be one thing. And if you want to generate a new one, making sure there is no collision, that could also be a useful one, so that I don't even have to think about the national registry level. I could just generate on the OCN. Later on, if I need it on the other side, I still can do that, It might make sense for this to, for some mechanism like this to exist.
Let's see. Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of how that would be possible, how the OCN could check for any OCPI party out there using a particular combination. But
are OCPI identities, are they not discoverable, or are they only discoverable, when the OCN node wants to share? I mean, what is the mechanism for this?
Yeah, funny you should ask. That's kind of part of the next the telemetry discussion. But no, I don't think they're discoverable other than them being on registered on the OCN registry. Perhaps you could go through if a party can't even register with a node without being on the registry. So I think registry is always step one.
So I'll take a look into this a little bit more next time, maybe I can bring it up in Slack as well. Yeah, but this was a slight issue. I don't think it's a huge issue, but it's, something we have to think about um, before we, before we move forward with the companies.
Right. Great. Thanks for that point. Robert and Adam, do you have any thoughts? What do you think about potentially a survey? Perhaps we could come up with, not necessarily on this call, but we could come up with some questions and some objectives for it. I think, well, there's some listed here already. We could try to get a sense of what they like about the OCN, what we can improve, what they need. And we could ask that on Slack. We could distribute it by email, perhaps. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So we should definitely do this. So also thanks a lot already, Mo, for your feedback there. That's really appreciated. And I think we should, because you mentioned Slack and mail. I think that's definitely the right approach. On Slack, we can reach the people who are already in some way or another in contact with the OCN today. At the same time, we should also contact people who have had less contact with the OCN before, because I think that their feedback would also be very valuable, especially in understanding why they have not worked with it yet. And yeah, I think that that's definitely the right way to go. Maybe we could start on Slack and first ask the question, which questions would you like to be answered? Right, so more like a meta topic there. So to really understand which questions they would like to ask the other companies. And then we can start building the survey and send it out. Yeah, and we can certainly also use the Energy Web network and of course the Share&Charge contacts and some of the other companies that we already talked to. So that's definitely a really good approach, I think. And yeah, also for everyone who watches this video then later on the recording, definitely also contact us if you have thoughts.
Great. Yeah, as the second bullet point there, we have already a couple ideas on what perhaps could be done to improve the overall experience, improving the documentation and OCPI testing tool and the OCN bridge, which we discussed in last month's call. It was interesting, just on Slack, the most recent question was about listing a service provider, and it turns out that the solution was that the party needed to be registered prior to being able to register the service. And the fellow mentioned that he hadn't that wasn't in the documentation, or he missed it in the documentation. So I just thought that was an interesting example of, perhaps the documentation is there and it was simply missed, but probably the documentation could be improved.
Yeah.
I think most of our documentation now is, for the most part, there's some on Confluence and there's some in the READMEs. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think making documentation more easy to discover. That's a good point. Probably that would be great. Another point that I heard is also to basically collect two different approaches. Like one that really points out the advantages for developers, which of course the documentation is part of. and at the same time also create similar resources more targeted at managers and C-levels of other companies, so that they can also see basically a very short time the benefits of the OCN. I think if we can provide both at the same time, targeted at different audiences, then that would also make it easier to really convey the advantages.
Right. I've noted that down. How did you find the documentation that you interacted with, Mo? Did you have any issues with it, or was it clear? Was it confusing?
I actually really like the documentation on for OpenCharge. I think it's also in a better, like more mature status than I would even say than the Energy Web documentation in general. So I think it's really well done. There were some points, like some topics I would have to dive into the individual repositories for the READMEs, and I think that's, I mean, for me that's good enough. But I can imagine people that are just diving into it, it might make a lot of sense to have it somewhere like where they can, like on the Confluence, or maybe you can even move the Confluence to kind of like another, like read the docs or Gitbook or something else, so that you can still have that, you can still edit it at the read, like on the Git or repository level, and it would update on the on, let's say, Confluence or some other documentation site. But so far I think it was pretty good. One project I think that, like, I think Hyperledger Besu has a pretty good structure, and it also made it really easy for me to kind of, if I do see any mistakes or things that need to be updated, I can just create an issue really easily. So I think Hyperledger Besu's documentation could be a good example here, because currently I think with Confluence I'm not really sure how I could even raise an issue or edit something and then have it request, like make a pull request. I don't really see how I can do that here on Confluence.
Okay, just for me to understand, you mean creating a pull request or an issue towards the documentation itself? Yeah,
exactly. I mean, okay. If it was if the documentation itself, I don't think Confluence does that. There's no like repository structure for Confluence, but if there was some sort of the documentation was itself a repository, and then that could be interacted with even by by anybody, and they could just make a pull request. I think that makes a lot of sense, because that makes it really easy. If I do find a mistake, I can just make a pull request, But if it's on Confluence, I mean, what would I have to do? I would have to maybe reach out by email to somebody in the team. And I think that for a lot of people, that's kind of like a hassle, right? You may not really do that.
Yeah, that's true. That's really good. Great for this comment. So I can see, of course, like two ways, as you mentioned, moving the documentation source code to GitHub itself and using the well-known GitHub tools. And another way that I saw already in place is that Confluence also supports a plugin which allows basically a public-facing interface to create tickets. So we could use Jira for a ticketing system and open this up for the general public, where with a very simple interface to create issues. Then you would still not be able to create a pull request yourself, but you would be able to create an issue directly from the same interface, and we would be able to work on it. Maybe this would be still easier than email. Mo, would you? So if there would be this option to create a pull request and actually make a change request to documentation, is there something that you would consider doing?
I do that all the time. So anytime I work with a new project or new, open source, let's say, tool, let's say that I'm just trying to go to the tutorial and I see that there's some mistakes in the tutorial, I always I always document, I always make a pull request on the changes or make an issue. And I think every single person that, goes through something like this, they might have the same response. And I think there's always updates going on. Maybe the tutorial was absolutely right a few updates ago, but sometimes it just, it goes out of sync. And I think new people are the best source to kind of get this feedback from. And the easier you make it for them to, kind of like raise issues, like you mentioned, if that through the plugin, or, make a pull request directly to make a change. I think if both options are available, I think you'll have a lot of value.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah, that's some great points. I think I could also see it being valuable to have the documentation in one place instead of having it split between Confluence and the README. I can see our approach now working well in some sense, where we have some higher level documentation that perhaps doesn't fit in a specific repository in Confluence, and then we have the repository documentation. But to me, it seems if it would be possible to have it all in repositories, perhaps that would be advantageous. Just a comment. I don't have much to say on the OCPI testing tool. I think it would be helpful, but I don't have much to add. And we discussed the bridge in a previous call. From your perspective, Adam, Robert, or Mo, do you have anything else to add on those points? If not, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe just so much that we noticed that the OCPI 2. Like the point-to-point interaction of the OCPI has led to integration problems for many companies because the standard is not so super strict. So it might happen that two parties, they're not compliant, yet they cannot directly talk to each other. That's why I think this testing tool could already, even if you're not directly planning on using the OCN, it could definitely provide some help. And in this regard, also give us more interest in the general community to maybe at some later point then actually use the OCN itself. But of course, also the testing tool would help to test your implementation towards the OCN itself. So that's why I think this is a general really good community effort that we could actually discuss with the wider OCPI community.
Right, I agree with that. Are you aware of any other efforts to create OCPI testing tools? Perhaps we should reach out to ELAD and see if they know of any efforts.
Yeah, exactly. Like I know that there was also a thread on Slack where someone actually even mentioned they would be open to sharing their resources that they used for testing. So I think this would be definitely a great point to start. We should just be aware that, of course, we would have to be more strict than the standard, because otherwise it would really not provide much value. And by that, of course, we would also introduce some kind of opinion about some of the interpretation of the standard. But in the end, that's also the goal. It's just something that we should be aware of, that in specific details, it will probably break some implementation.
Good point. All right, let's move to our next agenda item then. This relates to what we were talking about earlier in some sense, the OCN party discovery and telemetry. We've been thinking that it would be helpful to have more accessible information on which parties are connected to the OCN, their usage and their status, as well as additional business details. Yeah, and the OCPI hub client info module could be useful towards that. Or maybe I could start with the description of the OCPI hub client info module. I put quite a bit of information here. The idea is that in general, the hub concept of OCPI allows parties to communicate their status to other parties connected to the hub. They can either have their statuses updated. The hub can push to other parties any updates that it receives, or parties can request the status of any other party. You can either have connected, offline, planned, or suspended. And in our implementation of hub client info in the OCN node, we made some decisions as to what those, some of it is provided in the specification and some of it we adapted to the OCN. The OCPI specification defines a still alive check, so that every 5 minutes is their recommendation that each party is pinged. I think we are pinging their versions endpoint, assuming that every party will have that accessible. And if they don't respond to that check, then they're marked as offline. If they do respond, or if they send a message that's received by the node, then they're marked as connected. And then we decided that a party that's just in the OCN registry but hasn't yet connected has a planned status. The OCN node periodically queries the OCN registry for new planned parties. And then if a party chooses to disconnect from the node, after being connected, and delete its connection, then it's marked as suspended. So that's how the implementation currently is in the OCN node. And I think this would be a good tool to be able to display the status of parties, because we do have, at least on the Volta network, quite a few parties registered, but it's unclear as to their status. Yeah, I think the public dashboard as well, we started implementing in Confluence, but it doesn't have, I think that just is a list of the connected parties. It doesn't yet include the status information or these additional business details. Maybe overall that then provides a recap of where the discovery and telemetry is with the OCN currently. Yeah, with regards to optional business details, what do you think could be done there? Would that be something associated in the registry, in the smart contract, or would we provide another location where this could be updated? I don't think there's currently a provision for that in the smart contract. Correct me if I'm wrong, Adam. Yeah.
No, there's not.
Yeah, maybe some, like, thinking a bit into the future. So what I could see is that we provide actually like a more traditional login to a website, to the dashboard website, where each party can actually sign in using their OCN credentials, and then they can just update their profile there, just to be known. So they could just update their names, their website, their logo, something that, and we could then actually display this on this dashboard site. And that's also what I wanted to like describe with like who I can partner with. For example, if you're a company that's providing a specific service, or you are you want to announce that you're in the process of creating an OCN app, and you're looking for someone with a specific data source, or you have a specific data source and you're looking for someone to develop apps for it, then this could also be this place to actually find companies and partners that you could work with, creating like a more stronger network effect of the community.
Wouldn't it make sense, I mean, to also have this integrating with Switchboard? I mean, I know that role. I mean, it's still in development. There are, but they want to include like organizations own different assets or identities. Like, there might be consumptions assets or production assets, and they have identities themselves. And there's a sort of hierarchical structure they want to create. And I think this could be done as well with, open charge identities. Again, you could have this organization which would have these different, party identities, these OCN identities, and you could have permissioning. Again, I think there's access control and permissioning and service subscription also being built into Switchboard. This could be interesting. I think it could be really interesting from our perspective at least, because we're also going to be supporting Switchboard in the future. So if we could have a unified identity layer, it would be really, really good for us. And I think, potentially you could either have, the dashboard, the front end or dashboard, you could just fork it and use the same, Switchboard, logic, or you could, build it out in a way that it still could be compatible with Switchboard, from now on. So I think it's worth exploring for sure, though, because I think Switchboard is going to be, it's still early, but I think in a few months it should be at its first version, right? I'm not sure. Maybe you guys have better updates related to that.
That's right. Yes, I think I can certainly see Switchboard at a minimum being used for the login component, because already the key that's used to create a party could be used, the same key could be used as a Switchboard identity to log into the application that Robert described. As to using the Switchboard hierarchy and Switchboard roles to encode or contain information about the parties, that perhaps that makes sense. I don't see that directly. Switchboard is currently focused on role definitions, although, yeah, your point about the services is really interesting. Perhaps there could be a really interesting use case of somehow a Switchboard being used to subscribe to OCN services.
I would say even you could, I don't know how Switchboard, their design decision right now is, but they could just, let that, role and permission, decisions, they could just give that to the service. So you subscribe to a service and there could be like a flow where, these are the roles within these services or permissions within these services. So what do you want to do? So Switchboard doesn't have to make any decisions on what each individual service role or permissioning looks like. I think that if that happens, then I think this could be really, easier to adopt. Every service can make their own decisions in terms of permissioning or access control. And Switchboard actually will have a lot of adoption or more usage, let's say.
Right.
And also be better for service discovery. If I'm just going into Switchboard, and then I can kind of look at the different services I can subscribe to. And then from there, there's like each service has their own flow. I think that makes a lot of sense, because now at the moment, it's kind of difficult to understand within the energy web space what I can partake in terms of services, right?
Yes, it's a similar problem to what we're talking about getting additional information about the parties, getting their business details. You can look on the service registry and see all of the available services, but I actually think the registry has a little bit more, or that service registry has a little bit more of a provision for providing additional details. But yeah, it's a similar situation where the details of what service can be provided, how it's done, that it's not clear how to access that. I agree. And Yeah. Very perceptive, interesting possible switchboard use case. What do you think there's any action items we could take away, Robert, with regard to the solution you ideating on the solution you talked about, and I suppose that Mo has proposed as well?
Yeah, so I think as a first step, we should create just a public website, actually, that dedicated website for the OCN, and really work on the sign in through the DID into this site.
Right.
With the next step being linking this DID also with your OCN identity, because the OCN today itself is not DID based, so we would need to link those two identities. But that's something that we've already done before, so this I think would be quite straightforward. So this website, this dashboard website, would actually be an OCN app itself. And this way we could then show the information that is already available. And from this point, then we can actually continue and creating basically more information and also seeing what people would like to see there and going there. So yeah, basically I created a few items for myself, like curating this dashboard website, signing using switchboard, and maintaining the OCN party information. And another point that I also noted, of course, like sometimes in some regards, the nodes and parties might actually be the same company, but also in other setups, especially for like some countries are leaning towards one central huge node for all the CPOs in the whole country, which of course would make then a big difference in this regard. So I think really also showing the node information would be also quite interesting to really see how many parties are connected to a specific node. So we could then identify if there are like some really, really big nodes in the network that have been becoming really, really important. And then we could really also report on the state of health, like how distributed is the network in reality, things like this. And this is information we could then build actually directly into the OCN node code base. So this would not require a lot of manual interaction.
Right. Yeah, on your point about linking the identities, I think the identity that's used currently to register a party, that same key pair could be used directly to log into a switchboard integrated application. So perhaps the linking would be quite simple. I wonder if that's acceptable to have that ID, because I mean, if people have simply generated a key pair that they're using on a server, for instance, they would then have to say integrate that key pair into MetaMask or some other wallet so that they can communicate with the DApp.
Yeah, like from my feeling, but that's something we should definitely ask the community, is that they should be separate, because the identity on the OCN is really something that is security critical.
Right.
So it will probably be quite well protected ideally. And the other identity is mainly to sign into the dashboard website where you can update your company's logo. So they are, I would assume, like a different security class, and being able to detach those and have one identity on the OCN and another identity that is yeah, let's hold it switchboard specific. Which
Right.
you would also use for other switchboard apps that are non-OCN related. I think would make sense to detach them, but I
Right.
think that's definitely something we should probably discuss in more detail.
Right. Good point. Right. All right. I think that's some good conversation around this area, and we have some next steps as well. Any other comments on this topic?
Yeah, like one thought that is also always in my mind is, of course, regarding like privacy in general. When we talk here about showing more information, collecting more information about companies, that's definitely a topic that we should also discuss. That's why I think the information, of course, should be optional. So if you don't want to show up on the dashboard, if you don't want to provide certain information about your company, that's of course possible. I think even at the same time, if you want to run an anonymous node, that's also fine. You can connect to the network and just host your own OCN node, not make it, not whitelist any other party. That's fine too. And then also privacy at a different level, like privacy of the actual OCN tokens, basically the devices that connect to the OCN. I think that's a topic that we should probably reserve for another time. So if someone has any thoughts on this for the next developer call, I would really like to explore this privacy topic, because of course, like understanding like movement profiles of vehicles between charge points is something that has been researched a lot, and collecting all the information in a central place, like some governments are proposing at the moment, could pose some threats to privacy. And I think that's also something where the OCN can provide a really good solution to decentralize this kind of data and offer only trusted parties that are smaller individual than this one central hub.
Yeah, that's good point. Yeah, I certainly agree with the data, these business details for the parties, for the services being optional, being an add-on. And yeah, we could explore this more in a future call as well. All right, well, I think then that covers this topic, and our next community call then is the second Tuesday of May, so that's May 11th. And in the meantime, I'll see everyone on Slack. Great. Thank you all, and talk to you soon.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Have a nice day, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.